What up? WINBUSH here. And as promised, here's the water sphere tutorial that I was telling you guys about. But make sure you guys are using XParticles early access. I have version 690. I think that's the latest. But you'll definitely need to use the early access to be able to get some of the presets that we're going to be using. So with that being said, I'm going to go up to XParticles, come down to XP Quick Tools. And then this gives us our presets to work with. It should start on particle effects, but what we want is the fluid and grains. So I'll click on the fluid FX water body here, and that gives us this cube here. And if I hit play, you see it gives us some particles to work with automatically. It has all the attributes already in where we need them. So if I click on my emitter here, we can see that the emission mode is hexagonal, and under our display they already have the gradient so that our particles go from white to blue depending on their speed there. So everything is already set up, and we also have our fluid effects here as well. And so I like to work in I like to make everything organized, and so I want to go to my XP system, and it brings up our system over here, and I'm going to delete the XP emitter that's inside the emitters because I want to use the one from our preset. So I'm going to take my emitter water body, bring this up to emitters, my fluid effects, put that under dynamics, my gravity, bring that under modifiers, and then my cube I could just put under others, or you can leave it below, doesn't really matter. So now what I want to do is I want to make a sphere. So I'm going to come up to my geometry, click sphere. I'm going to bring my radius up to like 150 just to make it a little bit larger. And you can see it's not a perfect sphere, so I'm going to bring my segments up to 50. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm going to render on Redshift, and if you're using Cinema 4D's render, when you have render perfect, it's going to render a perfect sphere even at a lower segment. But with Redshift, you're going to have to use a higher segment count. And so now I'm going to go back to my cube. I'm going to grab my display tag here and my collision tag here and just drag these up to my sphere. Then I can delete this cube and bring my sphere back down to other objects like so. So now we have our sphere. We can see through it, and it has a collision tag on there. So now I want to make my emitter body do the same thing. So I'm going to click on my water body here, go to emissions, and come over to, I want to go over to objects and come down to emitter shape. Then I want to click on sphere, and then I'm going to make my sphere a radius of like 90. And let's drag our timeline out. We'll put like 500 frames in here. And let's click play, and there you can see we have our water splashing around like so. So that's quick and easy, only took us a couple of minutes. Now we want to add some waves, so let's come under our dynamics, and under dynamic objects here, let's click on XP wave, and you can see it gives us this gradient motion, and it kind of shows you how our wave is going to be moving, but we can't see through it to see our particles. And so under my XP wave, I'm going to click on my display, and under draw type, let's click on grid, and that also makes it move a little bit faster as well. So now you can see we're getting big splashes in here. And if we want to make it even more larger, like what's in my example, click on object here, in my strength, bring this up to like 25. And you can see in real time our waves are already starting to get crazy and splash all over the place. So that looks good there. So now I want to bring in my object, and for that I used mega scans. I mean, you can use any object that you want, but for my example I'm going to use this one called rock assembly. So I'm using Quixel Bridge right now. It's out of mega scans, but like I was saying, you can use anything in there that you want. So I'm going to go to my export settings. Everything looks fine. I'm just going to use a 2K texture, LOD 1, because it doesn't need to be high res for this example. Make sure I'm exporting the Cinema 40, and I'm going to just click, actually before I do that, I want to come under my render setting, make sure I'm on Redshift first. And again, this is for if you're using the Quixel Bridge. you want to make sure you're on Redshift so that it gives us our Redshift materials. So now I'm gonna go back to Bridge, click export, wait for everything to export. Oh, it's already done. Export to Cinema 4D, successful. I could close this out, and there we go. Now I have my rock axis there, and I'm actually just going to use this bottom one here. It gives us our variance and LED levels, but only need the bottom one here, so I could delete the rest. So I'm gonna take this, go to my coordinates, bring this down to 1 for our size, and let's drag this all the way down to the bottom so it comes outside of our sphere a little bit, like so. Okay, cool. So let's drag back, and actually under my sphere, if I click on my display tag, click down my usability, or my visibility, sorry, click use, and bring this down to like 0, so that makes our sphere invisible. And you want to do that for when you're rendering anyway, so it doesn't render out our sphere. So now I want to go down to my default object, come down to XParticle tags, and let's do an XP collider. Want it on the outside. Friction is fine. Actually, let's bring this up to like 10. Our bounce is fine. Let's just raise our bounce variance up a little bit, friction variance up a little bit, and let's click play, see what happens. And there we go. Now we have our particles splashing against our rock here. And for render purposes, we don't want this giant rock like just bouldering out the bottom of our sphere here. So we want our rock to take shape of the sphere. So to do that, I'm gonna click on my sphere, hold down Control on my keyboard, click and drag my sphere down, and then I'm gonna delete these 2 tags there. And then I'm gonna go over here to this area here and go down to make a bowl. And then I'm gonna just bring my bowl down and drag my 2 objects. So this is my rock. Actually, rename this the rock, and my sphere. Drag this down the bowl, and you'll see that our sphere is actually making a hole in our rock. We want the reverse. So if I click on bowl and go under where it says bowling type, if I do A intersect B, now we have a rock formation here, and it's taking shape of our sphere. So if I click play, you can see that our particles are moving alongside of the rock, and everything is a nice sphere. Okay, so now we want to add some white water to it, which will be our foam. So let's go up to dynamics, and under our dynamic object, let's click on XP foam. Okay, so now that I have XP foam, I want to click on object, and right beside the emitter we have create. So you hit the create tab, and let me click back on XP foam. You'll see that it made an emitter called XP emitter, which comes up under our emitters here. So let me rename XP emitter to XP emitter foam, just so we know what it is. And then if I come back up to my XP foam, I'm gonna change some of these attributes. So for my crest rate, let's just say like 50, air rate 50. After age, we could do like 5. So what after age does is after 5 frames, our foam is going to start to generate. And then for my max crest, I want to bring this up to 100. And if you ever want to know what all these attributes do, make sure you just click on the question mark or the camera here to get a better explanation of what all these things do here. And then let me click back on my XP foam, and I want to come under my display, and I'm gonna leave these as circle, but for my particle color for right now, I want to make it red so that I can see whenever our foam is starting to emit. So let me click on play, and there you can see after 5 frames, now we're starting to get our foam, and it's splashing all around and mixing with our original particles here. So this part is very important here. So if I go under my emission, and I'm on my XP foam, under radius, let me zoom in here, click play. So you can see the radius of our foam, it's on 3 right now. And so basically whenever we go to render out the white water with Redshift, it's going to be just the particles that are in the center of our circles here, which you really can't see yet. And so whenever I originally, this is something that I just learned doing this project. So when I was originally doing it, it looked like my particles were floating on top of my rock. And the guys on Discord told me to make my radius here a smaller radius. So I went with 0.1. And this doesn't slow down your preview at all, because your foam basically emits from your original particles that you have in there. So if I went to my water body and I bring my radius down, that's going to add more particles and make the playback speed a little bit slower, because making it a little bit more precise. But for foam, you don't really have to worry about that. So you could go really small, like down to 0.1, and everything should be fine. Hopefully that made sense, but just trust me on it. So if I click play now, you can see all of our particles here. Our radius circumference is a lot smaller. Everything is colliding off the rock very nicely. And yeah, everything's looking good now. So the one thing in Redshift is, if I click on my XP foam and I go up to my tags, click on Redshift object. So I make a Redshift tag. Whenever you have a tag on the particle emitter, it's going to come up with this particle tab here. And this is how you render out your particles. So I use the point instance. I mean, you could use a geometry if you want, but the point instance is the easiest. But what the point instance does is, whatever your display is, that's what it's going to render the color for. So we can see that we have it red here. So if I come under my Redshift render view and click render, you can see our particles are all red here, and that's not what we want for a white water. And so you'll want to make sure that you change the color back to white, or whatever color you want to use, but I'm using white. And when I changed the color back, you saw that the color didn't change in our viewport, and that's because you have to restart your timeline here. So now it's all white, and when I click on my render view, render it again, now my particles are white. And if I click back on my my tag here, you saw, or not my tag, my XP foam, go under emission. And if I bring this up to 1, no, that's not what I want to do, sorry. So if I go under my, oh, there we go. For our scaler, we can scale our particle size if we're under our Redshift tag. So let me bring this back up, re-render it. It's taking a second. Okay, it didn't work. Okay, let me restart my timeline. There we go. Okay, there we go. We have our particles back now. So like I was saying, if I go to my Redshift tag here in my scale multiplier, if I bring it up to like 2, it's going to make our particles a little bit larger as well. So depending on what you want to do in post, like I use motion blur to kind of bring the white water together. So 2, the scale multiplier 2 is a pretty good size there. So now we're going to want to add the liquid, which we're going to do under the generator. So I click on generators, come under XP OVDB mesher, and then I want to take my XP water body, bring that under the source here, and you can see now we get like this big blob here. So I want to go to my actually under general, let me move my point radius down to around 2, maybe even like a 1.6. Yeah, we could do something like that, 1.65. And then under filter, I want to go use filter, and the median is good. I'm gonna actually delete that and go with a Gaussian to kind of smooth this out a little bit, like so. And then let's hit render again. So now we have a mesh to our particles, and we have our white water particles. So now we want to make our water look like water. So I could use a default Redshift material for that. So if I come under create, Redshift material, make a new material, Let's just name this water. Then if I double click on that, hit edit shader graph, now I have my shader graph. And so under my RS material here on the right hand side under preset, I'm gonna just go under water, and then let's drag this over onto our mesher here. Let me show you, if I click render, it's not going to look too great, and that's because we don't have any lighting or anything for it to reflect off of. So I'm going to make an HDR light. So if I go under my lights and click on dome light, and then go under my path here, and let me see. Oh no, that was my HDRs. So let me find let me just pick a random one here. So I'll do, let's see what this dawn one, let's do the 4K version. Let's see what this looks like. So I'm gonna click on render again. There we have some stuff for it to reflect off of. Actually I want to pick something different. Let's see. Actually, let me use this dramatic one that I have here. And this should be good for just getting highlights and glints off the water. There we go. And then I want to turn it off, the background there. So under my dome light, come under environment, enable background, turn that off. And then I want to make it alpha, so I'll click on alpha replacement. So now we're getting the glints and the reflection, everything off our water there. So I want to make it a little bit bluer, kind of like the ocean. So let me go back under my shader graph, and I might just change my diffuse, make this like a blue. My reflection, I can even make a little bit bluer. And then our refraction, make this blue. There we go. We can see we have a blue shader up here now. Now let's click play, see what that looks like. There we go. And we could change, we could lighten it up and everything in post if we need to. There, so that's starting to look a little bit more like the render that I had. Okay, so now let me see. Let me zoom back a little bit. I want to have our camera kind of just rotating around our sphere here. So I'm going to make a camera, and not a Redshift camera. And I'm going to go to my coordinates, just zero everything out for my X, Y, Z and my rotation. So everything is here in the exact middle now. And then I'm going to come up here to where I make my splines at. Now I'm gonna make a circle spline and go under object and reverse this. Instead of XY, make it XZ. And then I'm gonna bring this and just hover it up above my circle a little bit. And then I'm gonna take my camera, go to tags, come down to target, because I want to make it target my sphere here the whole time, but I'm not going to add that in just yet. I'm going to also make another tag for my I think it's a line to spline. Let me click that. So I have a line to spline. I'm gonna bring my circle spline into the spline path, and now my camera should be attached to the circle. Let me see. Yep. So if I go to my quad view here, we can see, if I zoom in, my camera is attached to my circle. And to make sure that my circle, my camera is always pointing at the sphere there, I'm going to click back on my tag here, the target expression one, and I'm going to drag in, let's say, my sphere. So drag in the sphere, and now you can see, if you look in this front view here, our camera is looking down at the sphere the whole time. So I'm going to animate this. I'm going to start at 0, click on my my line to spline, and go to position, make a keyframe, And I'm going to zoom this all the way up to frame 500, make a keyframe at 100%. Yeah, sorry about that. My computer froze for a second there before I went to frame 500 because I didn't do a cache on this. It made it freeze up, and so I came back over to my XP system. I turned off everything over here so that I could scroll through my timeline with no problem. So now I'm gonna come back up to my my line of spline, make this 100%. Click make a keyframe there. So now if I come up to my perspective, look in the eyes of my camera, and I click play, you can see that we're rotating around our sphere. So if I want to zoom this out a little bit, if I click on my circle, make the radius, let's say like 500, and then I can even bring my Y down a little bit if I wanted to. And it's not quite looking how I want, so I'm gonna do this a different way. So I'm gonna create a null, and the null is gonna be in direct center. So I'm gonna use my null as my point to look at. So I'm gonna rename this null look at, and then I'm gonna click back on my target. I'm gonna make my null my target. So now when I move my null down, that's what it's gonna be looking at. So there, bring my null down to about negative 100. Then let's bring my circle up a little bit. Bring my null back up like so. Let's say like negative 80. Hit Control S so I can save it. And then click play. And you can see we're slowly rotating around our sphere. And I'm gonna turn my XParticles back on. And I'm actually turn my mesher off because that's gonna slow it down. I could turn my film off as well because I just want to see how this looks as I'm rotating around. So let's move our Y up a tiny bit maybe, and our null. Here we go. So it's looking pretty good right there. We're rotating around our sphere, and everything is looking good. So now, like I was saying before, the reason that I ran into the issues with it freezing was because I didn't do a cache. So when I went automatically to 500, it didn't know how to calculate all those frames in between, and it started to make it freeze up a little bit. And so to get around that, and so that you can render faster, you want to add a cache in here. So if I go under my other objects, get an XP cache, and then just select the folder that you want to save your cache to. Make sure you have all your stuff turned on, your particles, your foam, and your mesher, and then you select your folder you want to put it in. You click build cache, and then everything will play back pretty smoothly. So if I go to my my previous water sphere where I have everything already cached out, you can see I can scroll through my timeline and play everything back pretty smooth if I'm scrolling through, which you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't cache it out at first. So now let me go back to my working project. So now let me set everything up to render out the Redshift. So I already have my XP foam here, and I want to do an object ID and make this 1. And what this is going to do is for rendering out our puzzle mats, so that we have mats that whether you use a Nuke or After Effects, I'm using After Effects, I'll be able to mat that project or that part out for our whitewater. And then I also want to make one for my mesher. So I'm gonna come down to Redshift object tag, make an object ID for 2. And if you want, for your rock down here, we can make an object tag on our bowl, and we'll make an object ID for 3. So now we have we'll have a map for a rock, we'll have a map for a water mesh, and we'll have a map for our XP foam. So from here, it's all about what you really want to render out. So if I let me see, if I go to my, actually I could probably do it from Redshift. So if I come down to my AOV manager under Redshift, Just go under puzzle mats, and then you'll want to make sure instead of material ID, you want to do object ID, and then we'll just set a color for each one of those IDs we made. And then we can also make a reflection AOV if we want to send that out. Let's see, I think that's about it. So now if I go under my render view, let's click, let me play it through a little bit first. So remember, this is the non-cached version. I'm just letting it play through the timeline. Let's stop there. Let's click render. And this is gonna, if I click under beauty, I can see our puzzle mat, which is not done rendering yet. It's only like 34%. Let's give this a second to finish up. So once this is done rendering, we'll be able to see our puzzle mat, and we'll be able to see, oh, we already see our reflections. So why can't I see my puzzle mats? Let me go back under AOV manager. Okay, so I have an object ID. Okay, let me oh, sorry, that's because I didn't have the bucket render turned on. So you want to make sure you have your bucket render turned on. Now we have puzzle mats for our red, our green, and our blue, which is our foam, our water, and our rock. So if we want to make this look a little bit nicer before we export this out, we can also add an area light. So let me add an area light here. Let me zoom this over a tad bit. In our area light, I'm going to make a tag on there as well to a target tag. So I want the target tag to look at null. And now our area light's looking at our null. So no matter where we put it, it's always going to be looking at our center there. So let's backlight it a little bit maybe. Let's see what this looks like. You can see it's changing up a little bit. So this is all on your preference, what you want it to look like. Just play around with the lighting a little bit. See, we get some nice highlights here on the left hand side from our light there. And I think that's going to do it for this part of the project. And so if you follow along with part 2, we're going to take our different AOVs here for our puzzle mat and our reflection. I'm going to show you guys how to composite that in After Effects and just, you know, add the gradient background, add a lens flare to it, add some glow to it, and just make it look nice. So make sure you guys click on the link below for part 2 in After Effects. And as always, keep creating, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.